My sons tried to sell my house while I was in Portugal, on the first vacation I'd taken in 20 years. I found out because a stranger knocked on my hotel room door in Lagos and asked, very politely, if I was ready to discuss the counteroffer. I stood there in my robe, salt still drying on my legs from the ocean, and said, "I'm sorry, the what?" He was maybe 40, holding a leather folder, wearing the kind of linen shirt men wear when they want you to believe they're relaxed. He looked at his phone, then back at me, and his confident face folded into something closer to alarm. "You're a leaner Whitfield," he said, not a question anymore. "I am." "The seller." "I haven't sold anything." He looked down at his folder like it might rearrange itself into a version of events that made sense. "The listing on Bay Street, the Whitfield house, I was told the owner authorized." He stopped. "Ma'am, I think I need to make a call." So did I. That's the moment I want you to sit in for a second, because everything after it, the lawyers, the forged signature, the sheriff's detective, the night I sat in my own driveway at 11 p.m., watching a stranger's real estate sign get planted in my own front yard, all of it grew out of those 30 seconds. A man in linen, a folder. A counteroffer on a house I had never, not once, put up for sale. 3 questions were already screaming at me before he'd even gotten back in his car. Who signed my name? Who found a buyer for a house that wasn't for sale? And why now? Why, out of the 20 years I hadn't taken a real vacation, did this happen during the 9 days I finally did? I'm a leaner Whitfield. Nora, to anyone who's known me more than 5 minutes. I'm 59 years old, I live in Beaufort, South Carolina, and for 31 years I have run a design company most people in the Lowcountry know by name, even if they've never hired me, Whitfield & Co. We do interiors, we do event design, we did the governor's daughter's wedding in 2019 and half the historic Inn renovations, south of Charleston. I built that company from a card table in a rented duplex with a phone and a fabric swatch book, back when I was 28 years old, 6 months pregnant with my first son, and my husband at the time told me, not unkindly, that he didn't think it would come to much. It came to quite a lot, actually. Enough that 22 years ago I bought a house on Bay Street with my own money, my mother's inheritance and 4 years of profit I hadn't touched, and put it in my name alone. Just mine. That decision caused the first real crack in my marriage, though it wouldn't be the last, and Richard and I divorced 11 years later. I kept the house. He kept his opinions about it, which he shared, over the years, at Thanksgivings and graduations, usually after his second glass of wine. I have 2 sons. Derek is 36. Tyler is 32. I love them the uncomplicated, bottomless way you love your children, and I want to say that clearly before I tell you what they did, because I need you to understand this wasn't a story about a mother who didn't see it coming due to some failure of love. I saw plenty, I just didn't see this. I'd planned the Portugal trip for 8 months. Not a big trip, 9 days, a rented apartment above a fish market in Lagos, a week of doing absolutely nothing productive for the first time since the Clinton administration. My business partner, Priya, had finally convinced me the company would survive without me for 9 days. My assistant Marisol had the office covered. I told my sons where I was going, gave them both the address, gave them a number to reach me on WhatsApp, and told them I loved them and would see them in 2 weeks, because I was stopping in New York on the way back to see an old friend. 4 days into that trip, a man in a linen shirt knocked on my door holding a folder with my signature in it. A signature I never wrote. I want to tell you what he told me on that balcony, phone pressed so hard against my ear I'd have a mark there for an hour, because it's the exact moment the ground opened up under my life. His name was Colin Marsh. No relation to the detective who'd come into this later. Small towns collect coincidences like that, and he was the buyer's agent. He'd been in contact, he said, with a listing agent named Brian Castle, who represented the seller being me. I have a power of attorney on file, he said. Notarized, dated 11 months ago, it authorizes your son to act on your behalf in the sale of the property. Which son? There was a pause, the particular pause of a man realizing he has said something he cannot take back. Derek Whitfield Cole, he said. He's listed as your agent under the POA. I sat down on the edge of a stranger's bed in a country 4,000 miles from home, and for the first time in my adult life, I did not know what to say. I need to back up, but only a little, because I promised myself I wouldn't waste your time telling you about my childhood or explaining things you already understand. You don't need my whole life story. You need to know who I was walking into that hotel room so you understand what it costs to walk out of it changed. I am not, by nature, a person who panics. 31 years of running a business that lives and dies on other people's weddings and their worst days, funerals, too, we do those, teaches you to keep your hands steady when everyone around you is losing their minds. I have talked a bride out of canceling her own wedding 40 minutes before the ceremony. I have rebuilt a tent structure in a thunderstorm with duct tape and a prayer. People who work for me will tell you I don't raise my voice. I don't need to. I get quiet when things get bad, and the quiet is worse. That's who I was on the balcony in Lagos, quiet. Send me the power of attorney, I told Colin Marsh. Every page, now. It came through 9 minutes later while I sat with my knees pulled to my chest on a strange bed, the ocean still audible through the window like nothing in the world had changed, which felt like an insult. I opened the PDF. There it was. My name, printed at the top. A signature at the bottom that looked, at a glance, enough like mine to fool a stranger, the same loops in the E, the same underlined flourish I've done since college. Close enough that if you weren't me, you might believe it. I have never seen that document before in my life. Dated 11 months ago. Notarized by someone named Carol Dietz, a name I did not recognize, with a Beaufort County seal that looked real because, I'd learn later, it was just attached to a signature it should never have been attached to. The document granted Derek A. Whitfield Cole authority to manage, list, and sell real property on my behalf, specifically naming the address on Bay Street. I called Derek. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail, which was its own kind of answer, because Derek has never in his life let a call from his mother ring more than twice. I called Tyler next. He picked up on the second ring, laughing at something in the background, some ordinary Tuesday afternoon happening in his ordinary life in Colombia, and I said, "Tyler, is your brother selling my house?" And the laughing stopped so fast it was like someone had cut the sound. "What? Is Derek selling my house?" "Mom, what are you talking about? You're in Portugal." "I know where I am," I said, and I heard my own voice for the first time doing something I didn't recognize, flat, controlled, a voice I use with vendors who have tried to shortchange me on an invoice. "Tyler, does your brother have a power of attorney for my house?" The silence on the other end went on long enough that I knew, before he said a word, that the answer was going to break something between us that might not go back together the same way. Mom, I don't know anything about a house sale," he said, and I believed him mostly because Tyler has never once in his life been able to lie to me convincingly, not even about the truck he wrecked at 19. But there was, a few months back, Derek asked me to sign something, a witness line. He said it was for refinancing something with the business. I didn't read it close. I'm sorry, I should have read it. There it was, question number 4, and I hadn't even unpacked my suitcase. What business? What refinancing? And why would my younger son sign his name to a document that gave his brother the power to sell the house? I raised them both in. The house with the crepe myrtle Tyler broke his arm falling out of. The house where Derek's prom photos still hang in the upstairs hallway. The house that is, quite literally, the only thing in this world I have ever owned free and clear that nobody gave me, nobody co-signed, nobody's name is on but mine. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on that balcony until 4 in the morning with my laptop, going through my email, my bank statements, anything Derek might have had access to, trying to find the thread that led backward to 11 months ago, to whatever moment my son decided the answer to whatever problem he had was to forge his mother's signature. I found the beginning of it by accident, at 3:40 in the morning, in an email I'd nearly deleted from my own accountant 6 months earlier. A routine notice about a lien search on the Bay Street property, requested, the email said, by the property owner's representative. I had never authorized a representative. I closed the laptop and watched the sun come up over the Atlantic from the wrong side of it, and I made a decision that would define everything that came after. I was not going to call Derek screaming. I was not going to fly home in a panic and start throwing accusations at my own son in my own front yard for the neighbors to watch. I was going to find out exactly what he had done, exactly who had helped him do it, and exactly how far it went. And then I was going to make sure it never happened to anyone else's mother again. I need to tell you about the day I bought that house, because it explains why I couldn't just let this go, why it's just property. Mom, a phrase Derek would use on me more than once in the weeks ahead, was never going to land the way he wanted it to. I was 37 years old. Richard and I had been married 9 years by then, and the business was finally turning a real profit, enough that when my mother passed and left me $18,000 on top of what I'd saved, I had enough for a down payment on the Bay Street house without touching a dime of our joint accounts. I remember standing in the kitchen of our old rental with the pre-approval letter in my hand, and Richard reading it over my shoulder, and the particular quiet that came over him. "This should be both our names," he said, not angry, not yet, just certain, the way he was certain about most things back then. "It's my mother's money," I said, "and my business income financed the rest of the qualifying. The bank only needed my numbers." "That's not the point, Nora. We're married. Married people buy houses together." "Married people can also choose not to," I said, "and I've chosen not to. This one's mine." I want to be fair to Richard, 22 years later, because he wasn't a villain in that argument, not really. He was a man raised to believe that everything in a marriage should be pooled, that keeping something separate was a kind of insult, a hedge against the relationship itself. And maybe it was, a little. I won't pretend that decision came from nowhere. I'd watched my own mother lose the house she'd helped my father build, in a divorce where his name was the only one on the deed, because that's simply how it had been done in 1974. And she'd spent her last 15 years in a rented condo 2 towns over, polite and gracious about it in the way women of her generation were trained to be about their own dispossession. I was not going to be gracious about my own dispossession. Not ever, not for anyone, not even the man I loved. "It's not an insult to you," I told Richard, that day in the kitchen. "It's insurance. If something happens to us, divorce, your business failing, anything, I need to know there's one thing standing that nobody can take a share of but me. That's not about not trusting you. It's about not trusting the world to always be kind to women who trusted completely." He didn't understand it then. I don't think he ever fully understood it, even years later, even after the divorce proved, in its own quiet way, that my instinct hadn't been wrong. Because when we split, 11 years after that conversation, the house was the one thing that was never on the table, never negotiated, never a single billable hour of our lawyer's time, because it had simply never been his to negotiate over. Derek was 15 when we divorced. Tyler was 11. I've thought so much, in the month since Portugal, about what that decision looked like from a 15-year-old's eyes. His father moving out of the house, his mother staying, the sense, unspoken but present in 100 small ways over the years, that the house had somehow been the reason, that Mom's insistence on something being hers alone was the crack that split the family in two. It wasn't the reason. Richard and I had a dozen better reasons than a house, different values about money, different appetites for risk, a slow drift that had started long before any deed was signed. But I understand now, in a way I didn't understand at the time, how a child can build a private mythology around a single object, how a house can become, in a boy's mind, a symbol for everything he lost in a divorce he had no say in. Richard remarried 4 years later to a woman named Denise, who I've always found perfectly pleasant, and their finances have always been thoroughly, visibly joint. His idea of doing it right the second time, I suspect. I think, somewhere in the boy's adolescence, that comparison calcified into something neither of them ever said to my face, that Mom's house was Mom's alone because Mom had never fully let any of us in. Not Dad. Not, eventually, in some private ledger I never knew they were keeping them. I didn't know that ledger existed until a man in a linen shirt knocked on a hotel room door in Portugal, holding a folder with my forged signature in it. But once I understood it, I understood something else too, that Derek hadn't woken up one day and decided to become a person capable of forging his mother's name. That capacity had been built slowly, over 22 years, out of a story he'd been quietly telling himself about a house that was never really about the house at all. It didn't excuse what he did. Nothing excuses what he did. But it helped me understand the shape of it, and understanding the shape of a thing is usually the first step toward knowing exactly where to press when you need it to break open and tell the truth. I called Priya Raman at 6 in the morning her time, which meant I woke her up, and I have never once heard her sound anything but grateful for that in the 2 years since. Priya isn't just my business partner. She's a lawyer by training. She did 15 years of real estate and contract law before she got tired of it and came to build a design company with me, which tells you something about what 15 years of real estate law does to a person. She listened to me lay it all out, the agent, the POA, the notary, Tyler's confession about the witness line, without interrupting once, which from Priya is its own kind of alarm bell, because Priya interrupts everyone, including judges. When I finished, she said, "Okay, first thing, don't come home yet. Priya, someone is trying to sell my house." And you flying home in a rage and confronting him in the driveway hands him the only thing he needs right now, which is you looking unstable. Nora, listen to me. If this goes anywhere near a courtroom, and it might, the first thing his lawyer will do is paint you as an erratic, overreacting older woman who can't be trusted to manage her own affairs. Don't give them the footage. I sat with that. It made me sick, and it also made sense, which is the worst combination. So what do I do? You finish your trip, she said. 4 more days. You let the listing agent think you're still deciding what to do, and you let me make some calls. I want to tell you that I calmly agreed and went back to enjoying my vacation, but that would be a lie, and I promised you the truth. I spent the next 4 days walking the cliffs above Praia do Camilo with my phone gripped so tight my knuckles ached, jumping every time it buzzed, doing the math on my own son over and over. When did this start? What did I miss? Was there a dinner, a phone call, a moment where he looked at me differently and I was too busy running a company to notice? I thought about the last time I'd seen him, 6 weeks before I left for Portugal. He and his wife Vanessa had come for Sunday dinner, and Derek had seemed distracted the entire meal, checking his phone under the table, laughing a half-second too late at things Tyler said. I'd asked him if everything was all right with the gym. Derek owned, I should say, the tense keeps changing on me even now. A boutique fitness studio chain, 3 locations, that he'd built up over 6 years with more ambition than capital. He'd expanded to a 4th location in Hilton Head 18 months before all this, against my advice, which I'd given once, gently, and never repeated, because Derek doesn't take advice from his mother well. He takes it as an accusation. Everything's great, he'd said that Sunday. Vanessa's actually been talking about looking at some property near her parents' place, kind of a long-term thing. He'd smiled at me, easy, warm, my son's actual smile, the one he's had since he was 4 years old. Nothing to worry about, Mom. Nothing to worry about. On day 3 in Portugal, Priya called with the first real piece of the puzzle. The notary, Carol Dietz, was real, a licensed notary public in Beaufort County, 41 years old, worked at a UPS store that did notary services on the side. Priya had found her through the county's notary registry and had a contact reach out under the pretense of needing document verification. Carol Dietz had no memory of notarizing a power of attorney for Alina Whitfield. She says she notarizes probably 4 or 5 documents a week at that counter, Priya told me. People come in, she checks an ID, she stamps it. She doesn't remember faces. But here's the thing, Nora, she keeps a log. State law requires it, and her log for that date doesn't have an entry matching that document number. So the seal is real, but the notarization didn't happen. Someone had access to her stamp, or forged the seal well enough that a busy agent wouldn't look twice. Either way, that document is fraudulent on its face, and once we can prove that in front of the right person, the whole POA collapses. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like falling, because it meant the last small hope I'd been carrying, that maybe there was an explanation, maybe I'd genuinely forgotten signing something in a distracted moment, maybe this was all some enormous misunderstanding. That hope was gone. Someone had planned this. Someone had gotten access to a notary's seal or built a convincing fake and used it to manufacture legal authority over my life. "One more thing," Priya said, and I could hear her choosing her words carefully, the way she does when she's about to tell me something she knows will hurt. "The buyer. I had someone pull the LLC registered on the offer. It's called Palmetto Ridge Holdings, registered 4 months ago. I'm still digging into who's behind it, but Nora, the registered agent's address, matches a UPS mailbox 2 doors down from Derek's gym." I stood on that balcony with the phone against my ear and watched a fishing boat come into the harbor, small and orange against the blue, and I thought, he didn't just forge a signature. He built the whole thing: the buyer, the seal, the witness. My own son constructed an entire fictional transaction with me as the only person in it who didn't know she was in the play. "Come home," Priya said finally. "Your flight's in 3 days. Let's use them. I want a forensic accountant on Derek's business finances before you land, and I want to know exactly how deep this goes before you're standing in the same room as him." I didn't cry on that balcony, though I want to be honest and tell you I came close. What I did instead was open my laptop and start writing down everything I remembered about the past 2 years. Every strange phone call, every excuse, every time Derek had asked to look something over for me. Every document I'd signed at his request without reading closely because he was my son, and I trusted him the way you trust the people who came out of your own body. I filled 11 pages. By the time I closed the laptop, the sun was coming up again, and I understood something that would carry me through everything still ahead of me. This wasn't a story about a house. I flew home a day early. I didn't tell either of my sons. I want to tell you about that last morning in Lagos because it's the moment I keep coming back to, even now. I stood on the balcony at 6 a.m. with my suitcase already packed, and I watched the fishing boats go out one more time, the same ones I'd watched come in every evening for 9 days, and I let myself grieve, for exactly the length of 1 cup of coffee, the trip I'd actually planned to have. I'd wanted to come home from that vacation talking about the cliffs at Ponta da Piedade, the grilled sardines at a hole in the wall placed 2 streets back from the marina. The first real, uncomplicated rest I'd allowed myself in 2 decades of building something out of nothing. Instead, I was coming home with 11 pages of notes written at 4 in the morning and a folder of screenshots that would become, over the following year, the spine of a criminal case. I let myself feel the unfairness of that trade for exactly as long as the coffee stayed warm. Then I poured it out, rinsed the cup, and got in the taxi to the airport, because self-pity is a luxury I've never been able to afford for very long, and there was work to do. Somewhere over the Atlantic, 6 hours into an 8-hour flight, the woman next to me, a retired teacher from Ohio, on her way home from a trip with her sister, asked me, kindly, how my vacation had been. It was good, I told her, the first part of it anyway. She laughed, not understanding, and asked what happened in the second part. I looked out the window at the dark ocean below us, thousands of feet of nothing between me and the water, and for one strange, weightless moment, I considered telling her the whole thing, a stranger on a plane, someone I'd never see again, the safest possible audience for a story that big. I didn't. I smiled instead and told her the food had been wonderful, and turned back to the window, and spent the rest of that flight rehearsing, silently, exactly how I was going to walk into whatever was waiting for me on the other side of it. Priya met me at the Savannah airport at 10:40 at night, and we drove the 45 minutes to Beaufort mostly in silence, because there wasn't much left to say that we hadn't already said on the phone. She'd spent 3 days pulling together everything a forensic accountant named Walt Osai could find on short notice, and what he'd found painted a picture that made the forged signature look almost like an afterthought. Derek's fitness studio chain was 11 weeks from insolvency, not struggling, collapsing. The Hilton Head expansion had been financed through a private lender named Raymond Prout, a man who did not appear anywhere in public business records, but who Walt had traced through 3 shell entities to a string of predatory short-term loans made to small business owners across the Lowcountry, always at rates that started reasonable and became impossible. Derek owed Prout $210,000, due in full, with a penalty clause that doubled if he missed the date. The date was 11 days after I was due to land in Portugal. He wasn't trying to steal the house outright, Priya said, as we crossed the bridge into Beaufort, the marsh grass silver under a half moon. I don't think. I think he was trying to sell it, pay off Prout, and I don't know, Nora. Maybe he told himself he'd explain it to you after. Maybe he told himself you'd understand, eventually, that it was for the family. The family, I said. The house I bought with my mother's inheritance so no man would ever again get to decide what happened to something I built. That family. Priya didn't answer, because there wasn't an answer that would have helped. We turned onto Bay Street a little after midnight, and I saw it before we'd even reached the driveway, a realtor's sign, planted dead center in my front lawn, lit faintly by the street lamp. Bryan Castle Realty. Under contract. Under contract. Not for sale. Under contract. Which meant somewhere between that hotel room in Lagos and this moment, someone had accepted an offer on my house. I got out of the car before Priya had even put it in park. I walked up to that sign in the dark, in the clothes I'd been wearing since Lisbon, and I pulled it out of my own front lawn with both hands, and I stood there holding it like a spear. Shaking, not crying, shaking, which for me is worse. While Priya stood on the sidewalk saying my name in the careful voice you use with someone standing near a ledge. Nora, look at me. We need this sign as evidence. Put it in the car, don't break it. We're going to need every piece of this. She was right, and some small professional part of my brain that never fully shuts off even at midnight in a crisis knew she was right. So I carried it to her trunk instead of putting it through a window, which is what I wanted to do. Inside, the house was exactly as I'd left it. My reading glasses on the kitchen counter. A grocery list in my own handwriting stuck to the fridge. It looked so completely, mundanely like my own life that for one disorienting second I could almost convince myself none of it was real. Then I saw the lockbox on my own front door. A realtor's lockbox, the kind with the keypad, hanging off my doorknob like I was a stranger to my own house. Like someone had needed a way to let people in to look at it while I wasn't there to say no. I didn't sleep in that house that night. Priya took me to her place, made up the guest room, and sat with me at her kitchen table until nearly 2 a.m. While I went through every remaining piece of the picture out loud, trying to build something solid enough to stand on. Here's what I know for certain, I said. Derek is 11 days from owing $210,000 to a man who runs predatory loans through shell companies. Someone forged a power of attorney with my name on it and a notary seal that doesn't match her actual log. Someone found a buyer, Palmetto Ridge Holdings, registered to a mailbox 2 doors from Derek's gym. And somebody had a real estate agent, Bryan Castle, list my house and accept an offer, believing the whole time that the seller had authorized it. Bryan's the wild card, Priya said. Either she's in on it or she's about to become your best witness. I knew Bryan Castle. Not well, but I knew her. She'd done the open house for my neighbor's place 2 years back. A pleasant, sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who'd complimented my rose bushes over the fence. I did not believe, sitting at that table, that she was the kind of person who'd knowingly help forge a power of attorney. But belief wasn't evidence, and I'd learned that lesson exactly once already this week. Tomorrow, Priya said, we don't call Derek, we don't call Tyler. We call Bryan Castle, and we find out exactly what she thinks she knows. I looked at the clock. It was 1:52 in the morning, day 1 of being home, and somewhere across town my son was sleeping, or not sleeping, I hoped. I genuinely hoped he wasn't sleeping, 11 days from a debt he thought he'd already solved. He had no idea I knew yet. That, I decided, sitting at Priya's table with cold coffee and a stolen realtor's sign in her trunk, was the only advantage I had left. And I was going to use every hour of it. Bryan Castle's office was 2 blocks off Bay Street, above a coffee shop that smelled like burnt sugar and had been there longer than either of us had lived in this town. I called her at 8:15 the next morning and told her only that I needed to speak with her about the Bay Street listing, as the owner. I didn't tell her more than that. I wanted to watch her face when I said the rest. She met me and Priya at 9, and I will tell you honestly, the moment she saw my face, before I'd said a single word beyond hello, something shifted in her own expression. Not guilt. Confusion, and then, fast on its heels, a dawning kind of dread that I have come to recognize since as the exact look of someone realizing the ground under them has been fake the whole time. "You're the owner," she said slowly. "I am." "You didn't authorize this sale." "I did not." She sat down very carefully, like her legs had made the decision without consulting the rest of her. "Oh, God," she said. "Oh, God, I need to see the file." She pulled it up on her laptop right there, hands shaking slightly, and walked us through it while Priya took notes. Derek had come to her 4 months ago, she said, presenting himself as holding power of attorney for his mother, who, his words, according to Brian's file notes, traveled frequently for work and preferred to have family handle property matters when she was unreachable. He'd provided the notarized POA. He'd been, she said, warm, prepared, completely convincing. He knew details about the house's history that only a family member would know. The year the roof was redone, the name of the contractor who'd fixed the porch after the hurricane. He listed it 11% under comparable market value, Brian said, and I watched her realize in real time what that detail meant. I thought it was because he wanted a quick sale for an elderly relative's estate transition. That's what he told me. He said you were downsizing your obligations. Downsizing my obligations. My son had described selling my home out from under me, at a discount, using the language of eldercare, to a woman who had no reason not to believe him. "Who's the buyer?" I asked. Palmetto Ridge Holdings. A cash offer, which is part of why it moved so fast, no financing contingency, no inspection contingency waived on their end, they wanted to close in 3 weeks. She looked up at me. "Mrs. Whitfield, I need to be honest with you. I need to tell you something that's been bothering me since the offer came in, and I didn't have anywhere to put the feeling until right now." "Go ahead." "The buyer's representative, Colin Marsh, the man who I understand contacted you directly, which he shouldn't have done, that's on me for not controlling the file better. He mentioned once, in passing, that his client had an existing relationship with the seller's family. I asked what he meant, and he sort of laughed it off. Said something about small towns." She shook her head. "I didn't think anything of it at the time. I think about it differently now." Priya and I exchanged a look. An existing relationship with the seller's family, not with me, with the family. "I want you to pull every document in that file," Priya said. "Every email, every text, every version of that power of attorney, timestamps on everything. And I want you to understand that you are not our target here, Brian. You were deceived same as anybody else who trusted a man's story about his own mother. But we need your full cooperation, starting now, and we may need your testimony later." Brian nodded, already reaching for her phone. "Whatever you need, I have children," she said, quiet almost to herself. "I would never if somebody did this to my mother." She stopped herself, jaw tight. "Whatever you need," she said again. We left her office a little before 10 with a flash drive full of the entire transaction file and a piece of information that changed the shape of everything. The buyer wasn't a stranger. Somebody at Palmetto Ridge Holdings knew my family. Knew us well enough that Colin Marsh, a man I'd never met until he knocked on a hotel room door in Lagos, felt comfortable calling it a relationship. Walt Osai, the forensic accountant, called while we were still in the parking lot. He'd finished tracing Palmetto Ridge Holdings' ownership through its layers. "It bottoms out at a man named Raymond Prout," he said. "Same Prout who's been lending your son money at loan shark rates for the Hilton Head build-out. He's not just Derek's creditor, Nora. He's the buyer. He's not paying market value for your house. He's taking it as collateral he was never legally owed. At a discount he basically dictated, to settle a debt your son can't cover." I stood in that parking lot above the coffee shop, in the warm, ordinary South Carolina morning, birds going about their business in the crepe myrtles, and I understood the full shape of it for the first time. My son hadn't just betrayed me for money. He'd handed my house, the one thing in this world that was entirely, unassailably mine, to the man who owned him. I called Derek myself that afternoon. Priya wanted to send a letter through an attorney first, formal, controlled, no room for him to talk his way around anything. And that letter would come, it did come, 4 days later, and it landed exactly as hard as she promised it would. but I needed to hear his voice first. I needed one conversation, just the two of us, before this became a matter of process servers and case numbers, because he is still my son, and some stubborn, foolish part of me needed to give him the chance to just tell me the truth. He answered on the first ring this time. "Mom, hey, you're back early, I thought you were." "I know about the house, Derek." Silence, long enough that I could hear, faintly, a television in the background, a normal Tuesday sound in what I now understood was not a normal Tuesday. "Mom, I can explain." "Then explain." "It's not okay, it's not what it looks like. I was going to tell you. I was going to handle it and then tell you before it went through, I swear to God, I wasn't going to let it actually close without." "Without what, Derek? Without telling me you forged my signature? Without telling me you gave my house to the man who's been running collection on you? Without telling me at all until I called from a closing table you never planned on inviting me to?" Another silence, and when he spoke again, something in his voice had changed. Less panic now, more of a wounded, aggrieved quality that I recognized from every argument we'd had since he was 14 years old. The tone that says, somehow, impossibly, that he is the injured party here. "You don't understand what's been happening," he said. "The gym, Mom, I've been drowning for a year. A year. And I didn't come to you because every single time I've ever asked you for help with money, you've made it into this hole, this lecture, this thing about how I need to learn to manage risk, like I'm still 22, like you don't trust me to run my own business. So instead of asking, you stole from me." "I wasn't going to just take it, Mom. That's not, the plan was to sell it, pay off what I owe, and then, once the gym is stable again, I was going to make it right. Buy you something else. Give you the difference. I was going to fix it before you even knew there was a problem." I want you to sit with that sentence, because it took me a full week to understand what was actually wrong with it, underneath the obvious wrongness of everything else. Fix it before you even knew there was a problem. My son had decided, somewhere along the way, that my knowledge of what happened to my own life was optional. A formality he'd get around to once it was convenient. He hadn't set out to hurt me, not exactly. He'd set out to solve his problem using a resource he'd stopped thinking of as mine, and somewhere in that process, my consent had simply stopped being a variable in his equation. "Whose idea was the power of attorney?" I asked. The pause told me everything before he answered. "Does it matter? It matters to me whether my son is capable of forging a legal document alone or whether he needed help." "Whose idea, Derek?" "Vanessa found someone who could. Look, it doesn't matter who found who, it was a joint decision. We were trying to protect the family." "Protect the family?" I said, and I heard my own voice go somewhere very still and very cold, a place I don't think Derek had ever heard it go before, because his next words came out smaller. "Derek, you gave my house, my name on the deed alone, for 22 years to Raymond Prout, a predatory lender, at a discount, to pay off a debt he manufactured to trap small business owners exactly like you. Do you understand that you didn't just steal from your mother? You handed a piece of this family to a man who preys on people like you for a living, and you called it protecting us." "That's not, Mom, that's not what's happening. Prout's illegitimate." "He is not," I said. "And you're going to find that out the hard way because I am not signing anything, I am not agreeing to anything, and that closing is not happening in 3 weeks or ever. What's happening now, Derek, is that you're going to hear from my attorney, and you're going to need to find one of your own." "Mom, I love you," I said, and it was true, it is still true, it will probably be true until the day I die, which is its own kind of curse. "I love you, and I am not going to let you do this to me." I hung up before he could answer, and I sat down on Priya's back porch. And for the first time since Lagos, I let myself cry, not for the house, not even really for the money, but for the particular grief of hearing your child describe a betrayal in the language of protection, and realizing he actually believed it. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Vanessa. Nora, I know this looks bad, but you need to hear the full picture before you do something that destroys this family. Can we talk? Just us. Tomorrow, I looked at that message for a long time. Then I forwarded it to Priya, and I wrote back 4 words. Tomorrow, my lawyer's office, Vanessa arrived at Priya's office at 10 the next morning, alone, dressed like she was attending a funeral for someone she hadn't liked, dark, tailored, a little too composed. I'd known my daughter-in-law for 6 years. I'd hosted her baby shower when she was pregnant with my grandson. I had never once seen her look at me the way she looked at me across that conference table, like an obstacle. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. "Say what you came to say." She folded her hands. "I know how this looks, but Nora, you have to understand the position we were in. Raymond Prout doesn't just call in debts. He ruins people. He'd already started making calls to Derek's landlord, to 2 of his equipment vendors, hinting at things that weren't even true, trying to collapse the business out of pure leverage before the deadline even hit. We were looking at losing everything. The gyms, our house, Elliot's college fund." Her voice caught briefly on her son's name, my grandson, and I felt something in my chest twist despite everything. "We didn't have another option. You had the option of calling me. Would you have given Derek $200,000? The question sat there between us, and I made myself actually answer it honestly, instead of reaching for the easy, righteous version. "No," I said. "Not like that. Not as a blank check to bail out a 4th location I told him not to open, but I would have helped him find a way out that didn't involve forging my name on a legal document and selling my house to the man threatening him. I would have gotten him a bankruptcy attorney. I would have helped him negotiate with Prout from a position of actual leverage, because unlike you, I know people in this town who could have made Raymond Prout very uncomfortable very fast. You didn't ask me for help, Vanessa. You and my son decided together that the fastest route to solving your problem ran directly through taking something of mine without asking." Her composure cracked just slightly at the corner of her mouth. "We didn't think you'd say yes. So instead you made sure I never got the chance to say no." She didn't have an answer for that. Nobody would. "I want to ask you something," I said, "and I want an honest answer, because everything after this conversation depends on how honest you're willing to be right now. Whose idea was the notary?" A long silence. "My cousin," she said finally, barely above a whisper. "Melody, she works with a notary, not Carol Dietz, someone else who owed her a favor. They didn't actually notarize it properly. Melody got someone to just apply a seal. I didn't think it would ever actually matter. I thought," she stopped. "I thought it would just be paperwork, a formality to get the sale moving. I didn't think anyone would ever look at it closely. It's a felony, Vanessa. Forging a notarization is a felony in this state, so is fraudulently obtaining and recording a power of attorney. Do you understand that?" I watched something drain out of her face, a color I recognized because I'd seen it on my own face in a hotel bathroom mirror in Portugal 4 days earlier. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I haven't decided everything yet," I told her, which was true. "But I want you to go home and tell Derek something for me, since apparently texting me directly was easier than him picking up the phone again. Tell him the sale is dead. Tell him I know about Prout owning Palmetto Ridge Holdings. And tell him that if he thinks the way out of this is to keep managing me, keep deciding what I need to know and when, he is about to learn exactly how wrong he is." She left without saying anything else. I watched her walk to her car in the parking lot below Priya's window, and I saw her sit there for a full 3 minutes before she started the engine, her forehead against the steering wheel. I felt for her a little. Genuinely. She was 34 years old with a 6-year-old son, watching her husband's business collapse, terrified enough of a predatory lender that forging a document had started to look like the reasonable option instead of the last resort. That's not nothing. That's a real kind of desperation. It still wasn't an excuse. I want to be clear about that, because I spent a lot of the next several weeks turning that distinction over in my mind, the difference between understanding why someone did something terrible and forgiving them for having done it. I understood Vanessa. I understood, painfully, even Derek. Understanding didn't buy either of them anything back. "She just handed us Melody," Priya said, the second the door closed, and confirmed Prout's involvement out of her own mouth, unprompted, no lawyer present. "Nora, I need you to know, this just went from a civil property dispute to something a district attorney is going to want to know about." "I don't want Derek in prison," I said. It came out before I'd even decided I meant it, but I did mean it, and I still do. That's not entirely up to you anymore, Priya said gently. Once forgery and fraud are on the table, and once Prute's name is attached to a pattern that isn't just about your son, this stops being a family matter you get to fully control. But she added, seeing my face, how we present it, what we emphasize, whether we push for restitution over incarceration for Derek specifically, that we can shape. We just have to be smart about the order we do things in. I nodded, though I wasn't sure yet what smart looked like. I only knew one thing for certain, sitting in that office with my daughter-in-law's perfume still faintly in the air. This was no longer just about getting my house back. It was about Raymond Prute, and how many other families in this town had already lost what mine had almost lost, and never had a mother with a business, a lawyer, and 11 pages of notes written at 4 a.m. on a balcony in Portugal. Priya filed the emergency motion the next morning, a request for a temporary restraining order to freeze any transfer of the Bay Street property, plus a formal complaint asking the court to void the power of attorney as fraudulent on its face. Even with the sale already dead in practice, she wanted it dead on paper, in a courtroom, with a judge's signature on it, so nothing about my title could ever be quietly reopened later by someone claiming confusion. We want a clean record, she told me, the morning of the hearing, both of us in the hallway outside circuit court in our good suits, coffee going cold in paper cups. A judge saying on the record that this document was fraudulent. That's worth more to us long-term than you'd think. Derek had a lawyer by then, a heavy-set, unhappy-looking man named Gordon Aldies, who kept glancing at his phone like he had somewhere better to be. He didn't contest the restraining order itself. Even Aldies, I suspect, could see there was no version of this where a forged notarization survived scrutiny. But he tried, in his opening remarks to the judge, to frame the whole thing as a family miscommunication amplified by financial stress. Language I recognized instantly as Vanessa's, softened and laundered through a law degree. Judge Patricia Ellsworth was not, it turned out, in the mood for laundered language. "Counselor," she said, halfway through Aldies's remarks, "I have in front of me a notary log with no matching entry for the document in question, a forensic accountant's report tracing the buyer entity to the very creditor your client owed money to, and a title company that was 3 weeks from closing a sale on real property the actual owner had no knowledge of. I'm going to need you to help me understand what part of that you'd like me to interpret as a miscommunication." Aldies had no good answer, and to his credit, he stopped trying to find one. The order was granted in under 20 minutes. I sat in that courtroom and watched a judge sign a piece of paper that made, in ink, official and permanent, everything I already knew to be true in my bones, and I felt something in my shoulders come down half an inch, the first real loosening since Lagos. We were almost out of the courtroom, Priya already talking logistics with the clerk, when a man I didn't recognize approached us in the hallway. Mid-40s, in a gray suit instead of linen this time, and it took me a full 3 seconds to place him. Colin Marsh, the buyer's agent, the man who'd knocked on my hotel room door. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd want to speak to me, but I've been sitting in the gallery for the last hour, and I think you need to know something before this goes any further." Priya's hand found my arm, a light, warning pressure. "You don't have to say anything to him," she murmured. "I'm not here on behalf of my client," Colin said quickly, reading the room correctly. "I withdrew from representing Palmetto Ridge Holdings 9 days ago. I've actually been trying to figure out the right way to reach your attorney." He glanced at Priya. "Are you MS? Raman, I called your office twice this week." Priya's expression shifted, sharpened. "You left 2 messages with my paralegal. I hadn't gotten to them yet." "I understand why you'd be cautious," Colin said. "I represented the other side. But Mrs. Whitfield, there's things about Raymond Prute I think your case needs to hear, and I'd rather tell it to you directly than have it look later like I was hiding in the wings hoping nobody asked." I looked at this man, who 4 months earlier had, without knowing it, been the last domino in a chain designed to take my house, and who was now standing in a courthouse hallway in a suit that looked slightly too tight across the shoulders, sweating slightly despite the air conditioning, clearly carrying something he needed to put down. "Then tell it," I said. He glanced at his watch. "Not here. Can we talk somewhere quieter? I promise you, Mrs. Whitfield, once you hear what I have, you're going to understand this was never really about your family at all. Your family was just the easiest place for it to happen. We met him at Priya's office an hour later, and he sat across the conference table from us, looking like a man setting down a weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten how heavy it was. I've represented Palmetto Ridge Holdings on 2 prior transactions, he said. Before yours. Both times, the seller was a family member acting under a power of attorney for a relative, an aunt with dementia in one case, an elderly father in the other. Both times I was told the relative was unable to manage their own affairs, and the family was simplifying the estate. I didn't love either deal, honestly. They moved fast, and the pricing was always a little too generous to the buyer, but nothing about them was illegal on its face. People sell property under POAs for sick relatives every day. And this time, Priya asked. This time I actually spoke to the seller, Colin said, and something tightened around his eyes. By accident, more or less, I got your hotel information from Derek because he said you might have questions about timing, and I figured, why not just confirm details directly, save some back and forth? I've never done that before on a Prout deal. I don't know why I did it this time. And the second you opened that door and had no idea what I was talking about, I knew. Not suspected. Knew, because the confusion on your face wasn't the confusion of someone surprised by paperwork. It was the confusion of someone who'd never seen it before in her life. What did you do? I asked, once you knew. I called my broker. I told him I wanted off the file. He wasn't happy. The commission was substantial, and Prout's people are good clients, or they were, a lot of volume. I pushed anyway, and 2 days later, I got a call from a man who introduced himself as someone Raymond works with, never gave a name. Told me, very politely, that walking away from a deal mid-transaction could create liability issues for my brokerage, and that Raymond valued discretion in his business relationships, and that he hoped I'd think carefully before doing anything that might complicate things unnecessarily. That's a threat, Priya said flatly. It's a threat dressed up as a business courtesy call, Colin said. Which is, I've come to understand, exactly how Raymond Prout operates. He doesn't yell. He doesn't show up anywhere in person if he can help it. He has people who make calls, and the calls are always polite, and the politeness is the whole point. It makes you feel foolish for being scared, even while you're scared. He pulled a folder from his bag, a real one this time, and I felt an odd, sour echo of the first folder, the one in Lagos, and slid it across the table. Property addresses, dates. The names of 2 families he'd unknowingly helped Prout separate from their homes, before mine, both technically legal, both in his own words now, deals I'd take back if I could. I'm not asking for anything, he said. I know I have exposure here too, professionally if nothing else. But I've got 2 kids, Mrs. Whitfield, and somewhere in the last 3 weeks, I started imagining what it would feel like if someone did to my mother what I helped, without knowing it, get done to strangers. I'd rather lose the commission and my broker's goodwill than keep pretending I don't know what I know. I looked at this stranger, a man who'd once seemed to me, for exactly 30 seconds on a hotel balcony, like the villain of my entire story, and understood that he was something more complicated and more common than that. A person who hadn't asked enough questions because the answers were inconvenient, until the inconvenience finally outweighed the money. 2 more families on top of mine, I said quietly once he'd gone. Priya, this is bigger than any of us thought when I pulled that sign out of my own front yard. It was always going to be bigger, Priya said. Prout didn't build this in 3 months for your family alone. You just happened to be the one who fought back instead of folding. I want Walt cross-referencing these 2 addresses against county records by tomorrow morning. If there are 2, there are more than 2. The envelope was waiting on my front porch when I got home that night. No stamp, no return address, just my name typed on a plain white label. Inside were 4 photographs, me getting into Priya's car outside the courthouse, me unlocking my studio at 7:15 that morning, me standing at my own kitchen window 2 nights earlier, backlit, visible from the street. No note, no threat spelled out anywhere on paper. That was the point, I understood, standing there in my own driveway with the porch light buzzing overhead, The silence was the message. Someone wanted me to know I was being watched, and wanted me to have no sentence I could hand a detective and say, "Here, this is a crime." I didn't sleep that night either. I sat at my kitchen table with those 4 photographs spread out in front of me like a hand of cards nobody had dealt fairly, and at 11 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered it out of some reflex I've regretted since, and there was nothing on the other end, no voice, no breathing I could swear to, just open air and the faint sound of traffic for 11 seconds before it went dead. I called Detective Marsh first thing the next morning, and he came to the house himself instead of asking me to bring it in, which told me something about how seriously he was already taking Raymond Prout. "This is exactly the kind of thing his people do," Marsh said, turning the photographs over carefully, bagging them for evidence. "Nothing actionable on its own. No fingerprints will likely get a match on, no threat in writing. It's designed to scare you into backing off without ever giving us anything to charge. I want you to know that, and I want you to know it's working exactly the way it's supposed to work on most people." "I'm not most people," I said, and my voice only shook a little. "I believe that," Marsh said. "But I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't tell you plainly. A man capable of building the operation Prout's built is capable of a great deal more than an envelope on a porch, if he decides the math favors it. I want a patrol car running your street twice a night starting tonight. I want you telling me immediately if anything else shows up. And I want you to think hard, genuinely hard, about whether you're willing to keep going, because I will not think less of you if the answer is no." I thought about Otis Green's hands on his daughter's kitchen table. I thought about Carla Jenkins losing her late husband's rental to a nephew she'd trusted. I thought about a man in a linen shirt on a balcony in Portugal, and a sign in my own front lawn at midnight, and 11 other families I hadn't even met yet, who might be sitting somewhere right now telling themselves the exact story I'd almost told myself, that it was easier to just let it go. "I'm not stopping," I said. Derek called that same afternoon, and for one disorienting second, hearing his voice, I thought he already knew about the photographs, that somehow this had come from him, some new low I hadn't braced myself for. It hadn't, but what he said instead was almost worse in its own way. "Mom, I heard you're talking to other families, other people Prouts that he's worked with." His voice had an edge I hadn't heard from him since the very first phone call, something between panic and pleading. "You need to stop. I'm serious. You don't understand what you're dealing with. This isn't about the house anymore, this is. Prout doesn't play games, Mom. He doesn't just send angry letters. Take the settlement Aldi's is going to offer. Get your title cleared, get your money, and let it go. Please, for me, if nothing else." "For you," I said quietly. "Derek, someone left photographs of me on my own porch last night. Are you telling me to be afraid of the man you brought into this family's life, or are you telling me you're afraid of what happens to you if I don't stop?" The silence on the line answered the question before he could find a version of it he was willing to say out loud. "Both," he finally admitted so quietly I almost missed it. "Okay, both. Is that what you want to hear?" "I want you to understand something," I said, "and I need you to actually hear it this time. I am not going to spend the rest of my life being managed by men who think fear is a form of negotiation, not Raymond Prout, and not my own son. You made your choice 5 months ago. I'm making mine now." I hung up before he could answer, and I sat with the dial tone for a long moment, understanding that whatever menace I still felt from my own child hadn't come from what he might do to me directly. It came from what he was still, even now, willing to let happen to me rather than tell the truth from the very beginning. Here's a thing nobody warns you about when your own children betray you. Everyone finds out. Not all at once, not from you, but in pieces, at the grocery store, at church, in the particular way a small town processes a scandal, sideways glances that used to be warm, a friend who suddenly gets very busy when you call. It started with my sister-in-law, Carol, Richard's sister, technically my former sister-in-law, though we'd stayed close after the divorce in the specific way you do when someone chooses you over blood. She called me 9 days after I got home, her voice tight. "Nora, I need to tell you something, and I need you to not shoot the messenger." "Go ahead." "Vanessa's been telling people a version of this where you're the villain. That you're, her words, punishing Derek for a mistake when he was trying to save his family from a predator, and that you're choosing a house over your own grandson's future. She's told at least 3 people I know of. It's starting to move. I sat with the phone against my ear in my own kitchen. I'd moved back in by then, changed every lock, had a security company install cameras I never in 100 years imagined I'd need on my own front porch. And I felt something old and familiar rise up in me, the particular fury of being asked to be quiet about your own victimization for the sake of someone else's comfort. She forged a legal document, Carol. I know, I believe you completely. I'm just telling you what's circulating, because you deserve to know before you walk into the Piggly Wiggly and get a look you don't understand. I got that look 3 days later, at the Piggly Wiggly, from a woman named Denise Halloran, who I'd known for 20 years, who I'd done her mother's funeral flowers for at cost because her family was struggling that year. She saw me in the cereal aisle, and her face did something complicated, pity, and underneath the pity, judgment. And she said, "Nora, honey, I hope you and Derek can work things out." In the exact tone people use when they've already decided who's at fault, and it isn't the person they're being gentle with. I didn't correct her in the cereal aisle. Priya had already warned me that public arguments about the specifics would only muddy the eventual legal picture. So I said nothing, put the box of cereal in my cart, and drove home with my jaw so tight it ached. The worst of it came from a woman I'd genuinely called a friend, Linda Foss, who I'd known since our sons played rec league baseball together 25 years ago. Linda called me, not to check on me, but to relay, with what she clearly believed was compassionate honesty, that some people were saying I'd always favored my business over my boys, that this whole mess was maybe a wake-up call about what really matters. That may be, and here her voice got that particular gentle, patronizing softness people use when they're about to say something cruel and dress it up as concern, maybe at my age. It was time to think about what kind of legacy I wanted to leave, instead of digging in over a house. "Linda," I said, "someone forged my signature and sold my home to a loan shark. What legacy do you think I should be leaving instead of stopping that?" She didn't have an answer. People rarely do when you stop letting them talk around the actual facts. The gossip cost me something real, too, not just my pride. Marisol, my office manager, came into my studio on a Thursday afternoon looking like she'd rather be anywhere else, and told me the Hendricks-Farrow wedding. 120 guests, 6 figures of contract, 8 months of planning already sunk into it, had called that morning to explore other options for the coordination side. Citing, when Marisol pressed gently, some concerns about family stability that had reached the bride's mother through, of all people, Linda Foss's daughter-in-law. They didn't cancel the venue rental, Marisol said, apologetic, like she personally owed me the explanation. "Just the parts where you're the face of it. I think they're scared, Nora. Not that they think you did anything wrong. I think they're scared of being associated with a story people are still arguing about." I stood in my own studio, surrounded by fabric swatches and seating charts for other people's happiest days, and felt something colder than the Piggly Wiggly cereal aisle had managed. The particular, businesslike cruelty of being punished not for wrongdoing, but for proximity to a scandal. I lost 2 more events that month. Small ones, in the scheme of 31 years of work, but not nothing, and not painless, and I want to be honest that there were nights that fall where I lay awake doing math I hadn't had to do in over a decade, wondering how far this could actually spread if I let it. What steadied me, in the end, wasn't a grand gesture. It was Beatrice Call, a client I'd done 3 events for over the years, calling me herself instead of letting a rumor make the decision for her. "I heard some things," she said, direct as always, Beatrice being a retired federal judge who had never once in her life let anyone talk around a fact in front of her. "I'd rather hear the actual shape of it from you than a version filtered through the church parking lot." So I told her, all of it the same way I'd tell you now, without softening it or performing my own innocence for her benefit. She listened the way Richard had listened on the phone, without interrupting, which I was starting to understand was rarer and more valuable than I'd ever fully appreciated before all this. "Well," she said, when I finished, "that's not a story about an unstable woman losing her grip on her family. That's a story about a woman who kept her own name on her own deed for 22 years, which turned out to be the only thing standing between her and a felony. I'd say that's the opposite of unstable, Nora. I'd say that's the most stable thing I've heard all year. She paused. I'm still doing my granddaughter's engagement party with you in the spring. I'd like that on the record, in case anyone asks. I cried a little after that call, the good kind. The kind that comes from being seen accurately after weeks of being seen through a funhouse mirror someone else built. Beatrice told 2 other longtime clients the truth of it before I'd even asked her to. And within a week, the whispers hadn't stopped entirely. But they'd lost their momentum, the way gossip does once enough people who actually matter refuse to carry it any further. That night, I understood, for the first time, why so many women in my position quietly let these things go. Because the alternative, being whispered about at the Piggly Wiggly, watching old friends recast you as the villain in your own robbery, is its own kind of exhausting violence. Then I thought about Raymond Prout, confident that an aging widow with 2 ungrateful sons would fold the way he'd probably watched dozens of people fold before, and I picked up the phone and called Priya. I want to know everyone else Raymond Prout has done this to, I said. Not just my son, everyone. Why? Because I don't think Derek is the only person he's ever cornered into something like this, and I am done being quiet so other people can stay comfortable. There was a pause on the line, and then Priya, who has known me for 11 years and has never once heard me talk like this, said, "Okay, give me a week." It took her 9 days. What she found changed the entire shape of the fight. Walt Osai started with Colin Marsh's 2 addresses and pulled the thread from there, and within a week he'd found 4 more, buried in county records. 6 other properties in total across Beaufort and Jasper counties that had passed through shell entities connected to Raymond Prout in the last 3 years. Each one following a pattern so similar it might as well have been a template. A small business owner, drowning in a private loan with predatory terms. A family representative arrangement that let the debt be settled with real property instead of cash. A sale that closed quietly, below market value, with the original owner either absent, elderly, or, in one case, recently widowed and, according to the file, not actively monitoring the estate. 6 families. 6 houses in total over 3 years, all funneled through variations of the same scheme, though mine was the first, as far as Walt could find, where the family representative had needed to forge the authorization outright, because in every other case, the desperate relative already had legal access to sign. That detail mattered more than I understood at first. It meant the forgery, Derek's forgery, Vanessa's cousin's fake notary seal, wasn't incidental to the case. It was the one clean crime in a pattern of otherwise legal exploitation. Prout had built a business model around finding people financially cornered enough to hand over a house voluntarily, in a technically legal transaction that just happened to be predatory beyond belief. My family was the one time his method required an actual felony to work, because I hadn't given Derek that kind of access. I'd kept the house mine, alone, precisely so no one, not an ex-husband, not a son, not anyone, could sign it away without my knowledge. That decision, the one that had caused so much friction over the years, the one Derek had once called, in an argument years back, controlling, that decision was the only reason the whole scheme had left fingerprints. I called Priya the moment Walt walked us through it. I want to talk to the other families. Nora, that's not really. I'm not asking as a plaintiff. I'm asking as someone who wants to know if any of them are willing to talk to a reporter or a prosecutor or both. Priya, if this was just about my house, I'd take the settlement, get my deed clean, and walk away. But it isn't just about my house. It's about a man who's been doing this to people for 3 years, and every single one of those families probably felt exactly like I did. Ashamed, isolated, told by someone to just let it go and think about the family. We found 3 of the 6 willing to talk, eventually. A widow named Carla Jenkins in Jasper County, who'd lost a rental property her late husband built with his own hands, signed away by a nephew she trusted with power of attorney for medical decisions and nothing more. A couple named the Ferreiras who'd nearly lost their auto shop before backing out at the last minute when their daughter got suspicious. And a man named Otis Green, 71, who had in fact already lost his house 18 months earlier and had simply never had the resources to fight it, and who cried on the phone with Priya for 11 minutes when he understood, for the first time, that what had happened to him had a name, and a pattern, and other victims. I met Otis Green in person 2 weeks later at his daughter's kitchen table, where he was living now. He was a retired shrimp boat captain, hands like leather, and he told me the story of his own nephew, not a son, a nephew, but close enough in the family that the wound sat in the same place, presenting him with paperwork to help with the taxes, and how he'd signed it without his glasses on because he trusted him, because family doesn't lie to family. I didn't fight it, he told me, staring at his own hands on the table. Didn't have the money for a lawyer, didn't figure anybody'd believe an old man over a boy with a nice suit talking about mortgages. Just let it go. I sat with Otis Green for 2 hours that afternoon, and by the end of it, I'd made him a promise I intended to keep even if it cost me everything else in this fight. Whatever happened with my own house, whatever happened with Derek, I was not walking away from Raymond Prout until Otis Green had his day too. Driving home in the dark along the Marsh Road, I understood this had never really been the small story I'd thought it was in that hotel room in Lagos. Raymond Prout had built an entire business on the assumption that the people he preyed on would rather disappear quietly than make noise. He had picked the wrong family to make that assumption about. I called Priya from my driveway before I'd even gone inside. I want to go to the district attorney, I said. Not just about the power of attorney, about all of it. Prout, the shell companies, the pattern, everything. That means Derek's exposure gets bigger too, Priya said carefully. You understand that. Once the DA sees a pattern this large, they're not going to want to quietly let your son off with restitution. He's evidence in a bigger case now, whether you want him to be or not. I sat in the dark in my driveway for a long moment, and I thought about my son's voice on the phone saying I was going to fix it before you even knew there was a problem. And I thought about Otis Green's hands on his daughter's kitchen table. And I thought about 6 families, and a man in a linen shirt on a balcony in Portugal, and 22 years of paying my own mortgage alone so nobody could ever again decide what happened to something I'd built without asking me first. I understand, I said. Set the meeting. The process server found me at work. It was a Tuesday, 11 in the morning, and I was standing in my own studio with a bride's mother, going over Centerpiece Heights, when Marisol came to the door with a look I'd come to recognize meant something had gone wrong. A man in a golf shirt was waiting behind her, holding a clipboard. Eleanor Whitfield. Yes. He held out an envelope. I took it out of some old reflex of politeness before my brain caught up to what was happening. You've been served, he said, and left, and I stood there in front of a client with a stranger's manila envelope in my hand, my whole staff watching, the bride's mother's face frozen somewhere between confusion and second-hand embarrassment. I didn't open it until she'd gone. Then I sat down at my own desk and read the caption at the top of the petition twice before the words actually landed. Asterisk in re. Petition for emergency evaluation of capacity and appointment of temporary guardian ad litem, Eleanor R. Whitfield. Asterisk. Filed by Derek A. Whitfield Cole on behalf of concerned family members. I called Priya with my hands, shaking harder than they had since the balcony in Lagos. He's trying to have me declared incompetent, I said. Priya, he filed something. A guardianship petition. It says I've shown a pattern of erratic decision-making under acute stress. It cites the night I pulled the sign out of my own yard. It calls that impulsive and potentially self-endangering behavior. It cites the town rumors as documented concern among the community regarding petitioner's judgment. It's using the gossip Vanessa spread as evidence for this. Priya was quiet for exactly as long as it took her to actually read the document, which I'd photographed and sent while she talked me through breathing. This is a real filing, she said finally. It's thin and it's opportunistic, and I think a judge is going to see through it fast, but it's real, and it means a court-appointed evaluator can legally show up at your home, interview you, review your finances, and issue a report that a judge will weigh. This isn't a bluff, Nora. This is a second attack, filed the moment the first one started failing. I called Derek before Priya could stop me. He picked up on the first ring, which told me he'd been waiting for the call. "You had me served at work," I said. "In front of a client, in front of my own staff." "Mom, I didn't. Aldi's said it needed to be formal. I didn't know it would happen like that, I swear." "Don't you dare tell me you didn't know how this would land. You've spent 5 months deciding exactly how much I get to know about my own life. Don't start pretending ignorance now." My voice had gone somewhere I didn't recognize, somewhere past cold, into something that scared even me a little. "You are trying to have your own mother declared incompetent, Derek. After the forged POA, after the photographs someone left on my porch, after I told you I wasn't going to be managed. This is the same play. It's just wearing a suit this time." "It's not like that," he said, and even he didn't sound like he believed it. "It's, Aldi's thinks it gives us leverage, something to trade. If you drop the criminal referral on Prout, we drop this, everybody walks away." "So you admit it's leverage, not concern, not love, leverage." He didn't answer that, he didn't need to. 2 days later, Walt Osai found the thread that made the whole thing collapse under its own weight. An email, 7 months old, between Vanessa and a psychiatrist friend of hers from college, a man named Dr. Aaron felled up in Charlotte, subject line, quick weird question. Vanessa had asked him, months before I ever left for Portugal, how hard it would be to establish diminished capacity for an older relative who was still sharp in most ways, but maybe starting to show some rigidity and poor judgment around money, and whether a family could pursue a conservatorship even if the person contested it. Dr. Feld had written back, uneasy, warning her that courts scrutinized these petitions precisely because they were so easily misused. Priya brought it to Judge Ellsworth's chambers herself, ahead of the scheduled evaluation hearing, and I watched the judge's face change as she read it. "MS. Raman," she said, "are you telling me this petition wasn't filed in response to a genuine, developing concern about your client's welfare? You're telling me it was drafted 7 months in advance, shelved when a cleaner method presented itself, and pulled back out the moment that method failed in this courtroom?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you, Your Honor," Priya said. And I'd ask the court to weigh that timeline very carefully before ordering any evaluation that would put my client through the indignity of defending her own mind on the record. 3 days before the guardianship evaluation hearing, Tyler showed up at my house unannounced, at 9 in the evening, carrying a laptop bag and a look on his face I hadn't seen since he was 16 and had to tell me he'd wrecked the truck. I let him in. I hadn't spoken to him much since Portugal, a few strained calls, both of us circling the actual subject, him apologizing for the witness signature in a way that felt genuine but incomplete, me not ready to fully hear it yet, because grief for one son and fury at another don't sit neatly apart from each other in the same chest. "I need to show you something," he said, sitting at my kitchen table, the same table Derek had sat at for that Sunday dinner 6 weeks before all this started. "And I need you to know I only found it 3 days ago, and I didn't sit on it. I swear to you, I came straight here." He opened the laptop. It was a text thread, screenshotted, forwarded to him by a mutual friend of his and Derek's, a guy named Josh who'd been drinking with Derek the week before I got back from Portugal and who'd apparently gotten uneasy enough about what Derek said that night to eventually mention it to Tyler. The thread was between Derek and Josh. I'm going to give it to you close to word for word because I have read it more times than I can count since, and I don't think I'll ever forget it. Asterisk Derek, bro, I need this to close before mom gets back or it's going to be a whole thing asterisk asterisk Josh. Does she even know asterisk asterisk Derek? No, and it's better that way, honestly. She's been controlling about that house forever. This is basically just speeding up what she'd do eventually anyway asterisk asterisk Josh. Eventually anyway. Asterisk asterisk Derek. Yeah, like we're gonna inherit it, right? I'm just borrowing against my own future, basically asterisk asterisk Josh. Man, that's not really how that works asterisk asterisk Derek. It'll be fine, I'll make it right after. She'll never even really know the difference asterisk. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, more slowly, the way you read something you're hoping will change if you look at it long enough. Asterisk, she'll never even really know the difference. Asterisk. There it was, the actual belief underneath everything. Stripped of the language of protecting the family, stripped of Vanessa's story about Raymond Prute's threats. My son had decided, in a text message to a friend over beers, that my house was already functionally his, that my continued ownership of it was a technicality he was simply speeding past, and that I, the actual person, with an actual life, an actual business, actual feelings about the actual home I'd built, barely factored into the equation at all. Not a person to be protected, an obstacle to be routed around, gently, so I'd never even really know the difference. I sat on whether to bring this to you for 2 days, Tyler said, watching my face. Because I knew what it would do, and then I thought about what it would mean if I didn't, and Mom, I can't. I can't be the son who protects him by staying quiet, not after everything. I already did that once, when I signed that witness line without reading it, because it was easier to trust him than to ask questions. I'm not doing it again. I looked at my younger son across that kitchen table, and something in me that had stayed hard and controlled and lawyer-precise for 3 straight weeks finally, quietly, cracked. "Thank you," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I meant it to. "Thank you for bringing me the truth even when it costs your brother everything." "It should cost him something," Tyler said, and there were tears standing in his eyes now, unashamed. "Mom, I keep thinking about you finding out in a hotel room, alone, on the one trip you've taken for yourself in longer than I've been alive," and he knew. He knew exactly what that trip meant to you. You told us both, at Christmas, how long you'd waited, how you'd finally let yourself go, and he picked those 9 days on purpose because it was convenient. Not because he had to, because it was easy. I hadn't let myself sit with that particular detail yet, not fully, the deliberateness of the timing, not just opportunistic but chosen, my one act of self-permission in 2 decades used as cover for my own robbery. Sitting with it now, across from Tyler, I felt something shift from grief into something colder and more useful. "I need this text thread," I said. "The original, not a screenshot. Get Josh to forward it directly if he will, with a timestamp intact. Priya's going to want the metadata." "Josh already said he'll cooperate. He feels sick about it. He liked you from all the times he came around when we were kids. He said," Tyler's voice caught. "He said he kept thinking about his own mom." I called Priya that night, and for the first time since Lagos, I heard something in her voice that sounded almost like satisfaction. "This is it," she said. "This is the piece that turns my son was desperate and made a terrible choice under duress into my son planned this, understood exactly what he was doing, and specifically timed it around your absence for convenience. And Nora, it's evidence of premeditation, in his own words, 3 days before we walk into a hearing about whether you're the confused one. This changes the whole shape of Thursday." "I don't want to destroy him," I said again, because I needed to keep saying it, to Priya, to myself, to make sure it stayed true even as the anger sharpened. "I want him to face what he actually did. I want Raymond Prute to lose everything he's built off people like Otis Green. But Derek is still my son, and somewhere in this, I need there to be a version of justice that doesn't require me to lose him completely." "Then we build toward that version," Priya said. "But we build it from strength, not from you swallowing this to keep the peace. Those aren't the only 2 options anymore. I promise you that." I sat alone in my kitchen after Tyler left, the text thread open on my own laptop now, and I read asterisk, "She'll never even really know the difference asterisk" one more time. Then I closed the laptop, and I went out to my front porch, and I sat in the dark looking at the space in my lawn where the realtor's sign had stood 3 weeks earlier, and I made a decision that felt less like anger now and more like clarity. I was going to make absolutely sure he knew the difference. I want to tell you honestly that I was afraid walking into that courtroom, in a way I hadn't let myself be afraid since Lagos. A judge deciding whether my own home was legally mine had felt, somehow, survivable. A judge deciding whether I got to keep making decisions about my own life at all felt like something else entirely. And I'd read enough, in the sleepless nights before the hearing, about how these petitions go, how often the person being evaluated, defending themselves too forcefully, gets read as further proof of the very instability being alleged. There is no way to look calm about being called crazy. There's only a narrower or wider way of looking crazy while you deny it. The court-appointed evaluator, a soft-spoken clinical psychologist named Dr. Renata Sa, had interviewed me for 90 minutes 2 days earlier. My finances, my business, my daily routines, questions designed to surface confusion or memory lapses I did not have. She'd asked me gently whether I'd experienced unusual stress lately. I'd told her the truth, that my son had forged my signature and tried to sell my house, and that the stress in question was entirely, rationally proportional to that fact, not evidence of anything wrong with my mind. Aldi's went first, and I watched him try to build a case out of thin material. The driveway incident with the sign, framed now as an inability to regulate emotional response. The security cameras I'd installed as hyper-vigilant behavior consistent with paranoid ideation. Even, absurdly, my decision to fly home from Portugal a day early as impulsive travel modification under duress. Your Honor, Priya said, when it was her turn, I'd like to enter into evidence an email dated 7 months before any of the events described in this petition, in which the petitioner's own daughter-in-law asked a licensed psychiatrist how difficult it would be to establish diminished capacity in an older relative who was, in her words, still sharp in most ways. I'd also like to enter a text message from the same period in which Mr. Whitfield Cole describes his mother, prior to any of the erratic behavior cited in this petition, as someone whose house he was simply borrowing against. I'd suggest to the court that what's being characterized here as evidence of decline is, in fact, a documented pattern of a family building a narrative in advance and reaching for it again once their first plan collapsed in the same courthouse 3 weeks ago. Dr. Sa gave her findings last, and I sat very still with my hands folded in my lap, because for all my preparation, I genuinely did not know, in that moment, which way this would go. I found no clinical evidence of cognitive impairment, diminished capacity, or any condition that would warrant guardianship, she said. Mrs. Whitfield presented as an unusually organized, articulate, and self-possessed individual under what I'd characterize as extraordinary and legitimate stress. If anything, I'd note that the behaviors cited in this petition, securing her property, engaging counsel, pursuing a criminal referral through appropriate channels rather than confronting the alleged perpetrators directly, reflect exactly the kind of measured, high-functioning judgment this petition claims she lacks. Judge Ellsworth didn't take long. This petition is denied, she said, and I want to note for the record that I find its timing, filed within days of the collapse of a fraudulent property transfer this same petitioner had already secured relief against, deeply troubling. Mr. Aldi's, I'd encourage your client to consider very carefully what message a second attempt at something like this would send to this court about his judgment, rather than his mother's. I didn't cry until I was back in Priya's car in the parking garage, and when I did, it wasn't relief exactly. It was the particular exhaustion of realizing how close a determined, well-funded family can come to erasing a competent woman's legal say over her own life, using nothing but persistence and a story told confidently enough. And how many women without a Priya, without a Walt, without a Tyler willing to hand over a damning text thread, must have lost that exact fight. You did that, Priya said, watching me in the rearview mirror. Not luck, not a sympathetic judge having a good day. You built the record that made this an easy call for her, months before you even knew you'd need it. Richard called me the day after the guardianship hearing. I almost didn't pick up. We speak maybe 4 times a year. Birthdays and the occasional grandchild-related logistics, always cordial, always a little distant. The settled distance of 2 people who once knew each other completely and have spent 2 decades since carefully not doing that anymore. Denise told me some of it, he said, without preamble. From Carol, I wanted to hear the rest from you before I said anything I'd regret. I told him, all of it, the balcony, the forged POA, Prout, the injunction, the guardianship petition he just watched a judge throw out. He listened without interrupting, which was, itself, new. Richard had never in the 11 years of our marriage been a man who listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. I need to tell you something, he said finally, and I don't expect it to fix anything, but I think you should have it. Derek came to me, before all this, maybe 5 months ago, Asked if I could loan him $100,000 for the business, no formal terms, family rate. I said no. Why? Pride mostly, if I'm honest with myself. I've got Denise's kids' college to think about, our own retirement, and some part of me, I'm not proud of this, Nora. Some part of me has spent 20 years feeling like the poor relation in this family. You built something enormous. I built something comfortable. And when my own son came to me for real money, my first thought wasn't how do I help him. It was why is he asking me and not his mother? She's the one who actually has it. It didn't excuse anything Derek had done. But it filled in a piece of the picture. I hadn't had Derek exhausting one option before turning to fraud, and the option he'd exhausted first had been his own father, because some calculus in his head had already decided I was the harder ask. There's something else, Richard said, quieter now. Over the years, Christmases, arguments, whatever, I think I said things about the house, about you keeping it separate. I framed it, more than once, as you not fully trusting the family. I didn't mean for the boys to build anything out of that, but kids remember what their parents say about each other, Nora, even when the parents have moved on. I think I planted something I never meant to plant, and I think it grew into something I never wanted, and I'm sorry. That's not nothing, is it? Me being sorry, 22 years too late. It's not nothing, I said, and I meant it, though I also didn't fully forgive him in that moment, and I don't think he expected me to. But Richard, you didn't forge my name. You didn't build a fake buyer entity. Whatever seeds got planted, Derek's the one who chose to grow them into this. I know that, Richard said. I'm not asking you to spread the blame around so there's less of it left for him. I just wanted you to have the whole picture. And I wanted to ask, is there anything I can actually do? Not performative, actually useful. I thought about it. You could talk to him, I said. Not to defend him, to tell him the truth about what you told me, that he came to you first, that you said no, that some part of what happened started with two men in this family deciding I was an ATM instead of a person, long before either of you called it that out loud. He needs to hear that from someone who isn't me. He spent his whole life needing his father's approval more than he's ever admitted, Richard. Use that, for once, for something that actually helps him instead of something that just makes him feel better about himself. Richard was quiet for a moment. I can do that, he said. I should have done a lot of things a long time ago. I can start with that one. We didn't reconcile in some grand way in that phone call. That's not what this was. But when I hung up, I sat for a while feeling something I hadn't expected to feel about my ex-husband in the middle of all this. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a small, grudging respect for a man who was capable, at 62 years old, of looking at his own part in a disaster and naming it out loud instead of disappearing into the comfortable silence he'd used for most of our marriage. It wasn't much, but in a season where almost everyone in my orbit was busy protecting themselves, it was something. The district attorney's office set the meeting for a Thursday morning, 10 days later. I want to tell you about that room, because I've thought about it a great deal since. A conference room with government beige walls and a table too big for the six of us sitting around it. Me and Priya on one side, an assistant district attorney named Renata Akoy, and Detective Marsh. Frank, I finally learned his first name that day, on the other, Walt Osai at the end with 3 binders of financial evidence stacked in front of him like a small, damning wall. Detective Marsh, it turned out, already knew Raymond Pruitt's name. 2 other complaints had come in over the past year, both dropped when the victims got frightened and backed out. Ours was the first with hard documentary evidence. The forged notary log discrepancy, the shell company trail, the text thread, Brian Castle's full file, the email chain from the guardianship hearing, and most damning of all, a recorded statement Vanessa had unknowingly given during our meeting 3 weeks earlier, which Priya had, with full legal propriety, disclosed and recorded with proper consent notice under state law, catching Vanessa's admission about her cousin Melody and the fake notary seal on the record. But before Akoy had even opened Walt's binders, she asked the question I'd been dreading since the invitation to this meeting arrived. "Where's Colin Marsh?" she said. "You told my office he was prepared to give a statement identifying Pruitt's man by voice. That statement is the difference between a fraud case built on inference and one built on a live cooperating witness inside the operation. Without him, This is thinner than I'd like against a defendant with the resources to draw this out for years. I felt my stomach drop. Colin hadn't returned my last 2 calls. I told myself it was nothing, a busy week, a broker breathing down his neck about something unrelated, but sitting in that conference room, I understood how badly I'd wanted that story to be true instead of asking myself the more obvious question. "Give me until tomorrow," I said before Priya could answer for me. I drove to Colin Marsh's brokerage straight from that meeting and found him in the parking lot loading boxes into his car, cleaning out his desk, 2 weeks before he was supposed to have his deposition taken. He looked, when he saw me, like a man caught doing something he was ashamed of. "They came back," he said quietly before I'd even said hello. "Not a call this time. A man was standing outside my daughter's dance recital last Tuesday. Didn't say anything to her, didn't have to, just made sure I saw him seeing her. His hands were shaking around a banker's box full of framed listing awards. 'I have 2 kids, Mrs. Whitfield. I can't be the reason something happens to them, because I decided to be the hero in somebody else's story.' I understood, standing in that parking lot, exactly how close Raymond Prout had come to winning simply by being patient about who he chose to frighten. 'I'm not going to tell you what to do,' I said. 'You have to live with your own family's safety, and I won't pretend that's a small thing to ask you to risk. But I can tell you this, Detective Marsh can have a patrol unit on your daughter's school within the hour, and the DA's office can seal your identity from anything but a sealed court filing until Prout is behind bars. You don't have to do this alone, the way I almost thought I did in a hotel room in Portugal. That's the whole difference between what he's counting on and what's actually true.' Colin stood very still for a long moment, the box still in his arms. Then, slowly, he set it back down on the pavement. 'Let me call my wife,' he said, 'then let's talk to your detective.' He gave his statement 2 days later. Under protective conditions, the DA's office arranged within hours of my call. It became, exactly as Akoy had said it would, the difference between a fraud case built on inference and one that could actually put Raymond Prout away. Akoy read the competency email twice, silently, before she looked up. "This is the part I want to flag for you directly, Mrs. Whitfield," she said. "This document, on its own, doesn't get charged as anything. Asking a psychiatrist a hypothetical question isn't a crime. But it tells me something about intent and premeditation that a jury, or a judge in a plea hearing, is going to find very hard to look past. This wasn't one bad decision made under pressure. This was a family weighing multiple ways to take control of your life away from you, and choosing whichever one seemed easiest at the time. This is enough to charge Prout with a pattern of fraud and predatory lending across at least 4 counties, Akoy said, flipping through Walt's binders. Possibly enough to bring in state financial crimes investigators, given the scale. This is bigger than a family dispute, Mrs. Whitfield. I want you to understand that going in." "I understand. As for your son," she continued, more carefully now, "forgery of a notarized legal document and fraudulent transfer attempt are both felonies under state law. Given the evidence, including, frankly, a text message that establishes premeditation and awareness of wrongdoing, we could pursue charges independent of anything involving Prout." I felt Priya's hand find mine under the table, steadying. "What I want," I said, and I'd rehearsed this part more than anything else, alone in my car, alone in my kitchen, alone on the porch where the sign used to stand, is for the full weight of this to land on Raymond Prout. I want every family he's done this to found, and I want him to face everything the law allows. My son's involvement should not disappear. I'm not asking for that, and I don't think it would be right even if I did ask. But I'd like to explore whether there's a path where Derek faces real, meaningful consequences. Restitution, probation, mandated financial counseling. A felony record he has to live with, without a prison sentence that takes him away from his own 6-year-old son, the way this whole thing started with him afraid of losing everything for his family. I think there's a version of justice here that holds him fully accountable, without me being the reason my grandson grows up visiting his father in a facility. Akoy studied me for a long moment. "That's a more measured position than I usually hear in this chair," she said. "Most people who sit where you're sitting want blood." I wanted blood 3 weeks ago, I said. I still feel it some days, but I've spent 3 weeks learning what this man built, Prout, and how many people like Otis Green never got a chance to be in a room like this one. My son made a choice that hurt me terribly, and he needs to answer for it in a way he can't talk his way around. But he's not Raymond Prout. He's not building a business model out of destroying strangers. He's a 36-year-old man who got scared and desperate and made a monstrous decision, and I'd like the system to reflect that difference, if it can. We'll factor that into how we structure the plea framework if it gets there, Akoi said. I can't promise outcomes, but I hear you, and for what it's worth, this is exactly the kind of restraint that actually helps these cases. Vengeful victims make for messy trials. Clear-eyed ones make for convictions that stick. Detective Marsh spoke for the first time since we'd sat down. Mrs. Whitfield, I want to ask you something, and it's not strictly relevant to the case, so you don't have to answer. What made you keep going? Most people, especially in a family situation like this, fold within the first week. Take a quiet settlement, keep the peace. Because I spent 31 years building something from a card table in a rented duplex, I said, and I have never once let anyone convince me that the thing I built wasn't fully, legally, unshakably mine. Not my husband when we divorced. Not the bank when I needed a loan and they assumed I needed a man's signature on it. And I wasn't about to start now, at 59 years old, just because the person trying to take it happened to share my blood. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Akoi closed the binder in front of her and looked up. Let's get to work, she said. Raymond Prout's arrest came 6 weeks after that meeting, and his preliminary hearing was the first time I ever saw him in person. I hadn't expected to go. Priya told me I didn't need to, that it wasn't my case to attend in the same way, that as a witness rather than a party, I had no obligation to sit in that courtroom at all. I went anyway, and I brought Otis Green with me, because I'd promised him he'd have his day, and a preliminary hearing is not a trial, but it is a room, and Raymond Prout was going to be sitting in it. I don't know what I expected. Some version of menace, maybe, a man who looked like what he'd done to people. What I got instead was almost worse, in its own way. A trim, silver-haired man in his early 60s, reading glasses pushed up into his hair, a soft gray sport coat, the kind of unbothered posture you see in men who have never once in their lives been made to sit in a waiting room and feel small. He looked like someone's approachable uncle. He looked like a man who'd coached Little League. He glanced around the gallery once, almost idly, the way you'd glance around a restaurant deciding where to sit, and his eyes passed over me without a flicker of recognition, because of course they did. I was never a person to him. I was a line item. An asset with a difficult family attached, slightly more difficult than most, but not, in the scheme of things, memorable. Otis Green gripped my hand so hard in that gallery bench, I felt it in my knuckles for an hour after. That's him, he said, very quietly. That's the man who never even had to look me in the eye to take my house, had people do it for him the whole time, never once dirtied his own hands. That was, I came to understand over the length of that hearing, the entire architecture of how Raymond Prout had operated for years. He was never on any deed, never signed a threatening text, never personally notarized a single fraudulent document. He built a structure of desperate borrowers, compromised intermediaries, and shell companies, precisely so that every individual piece of it could plausibly claim not to have known the whole shape of the thing. And he sat at the center of it, collecting houses, while everyone around him took the legal risk on his behalf. The prosecutor, a sharp young attorney named Devin Ake working alongside Akoi's office, laid out the pattern methodically. The loans, the shell entities, Colin Marsh's testimony about the business courtesy call, the 6 additional properties, the forged notarization in my case specifically flagged as the aggravating felony that had finally made the pattern prosecutable in full. Prout's attorney, a tall, unbothered man in an expensive suit, argued that his client facilitated legitimate real estate transactions, and that any fraud committed was the independent action of third parties acting outside Mr. Prout's knowledge or direction. I watched Prout's face while his attorney said that, not a flicker, not the smallest crack of shame or worry. He sat with the calm of a man who had genuinely convinced himself, or at least trained himself to perform being convinced that none of this was really his doing, that the loans were just business, the discounted sales were just negotiation, the desperation of the people on the other side of the table simply not his responsibility to manage. It was, I thought, watching him, the single most chilling thing about the entire ordeal. Derek, at least, had cracked under the weight of what he'd done, had cried on his own front porch, had said stopped seeing you as a person who could say no like it cost him something to say it out loud. Raymond Prout did not look like a man who had ever, in the whole architecture of his career, stopped seeing anyone as a person, because I don't think he'd ever fully started. Bail was set high, given the scale of the pattern and flight risk considerations tied to his financial resources. Judge Ellsworth, the same judge from my injunction hearing, as it happened, Beaufort being a small enough legal community that these things overlap, set conditions that included surrendering his passport and a full asset freeze pending trial, over vigorous objection from his attorney. Outside the courthouse afterward, Otis Green stood on the steps for a long moment, looking back at the building like he wasn't quite ready to leave it behind. 18 months I carried that like it was my own fault, he said. Like I should have read closer, should have known better, should have trusted less. Seeing him in there, hearing what they laid out, that's the first time since I lost that house I understood it wasn't about me being foolish. It was about him being good at this. Real good. Practiced. You weren't foolish, I told him. You were trusting in a family that should have earned that trust and didn't. That's not the same thing, Otis, no matter how many times you've told yourself it was. He nodded slowly, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw something other than grief settle into his face. Not triumph, exactly. Something quieter. The particular relief of finally being believed. I won't walk you through every legal step of the 11 weeks that followed, the depositions, the forensic accounting hearings, the day Carol Dietz sat across from Detective Marsh and confirmed, under oath, exactly how a fraudulent seal had made its way onto a document she'd never actually witnessed. Derek pled guilty to forgery and fraudulent transfer 8 weeks after that meeting in the beige conference room. I sat in the third row of the courtroom, Tyler beside me, and watched my oldest son stand at a table in a suit I'd bought him for his college graduation 14 years earlier, and say the words, "Guilty, Your Honor," in a voice that barely made it past his own teeth. Judge Ellsworth read the plea framework into the record, the one Akoy's office had structured with my restitution preference weighed heavily into it. 5 years probation. A felony record that would follow him the rest of his life. 400 hours of community service. A restitution order requiring him to repay legal costs and cover a portion of the victims' fund the DA's office had set up using the pattern my case had made provable in the first place. No prison time. Mr. Whitfield Cole, Judge Ellsworth said, before accepting the plea, I want to note for the record that the leniency reflected in this agreement is substantially attributable to your victim's stated preference, not to any mitigating quality in the offense itself. Forging a notarized legal instrument to defraud your own mother of her home is, on its face, one of the more calculated breaches of trust this court sees. This court also has not forgotten that, when the first scheme collapsed, you attempted a second one, using this same courthouse to try to strip your mother of her legal autonomy rather than admit what you'd done. You should understand exactly whose grace you're standing on today. She looked at him for a long moment over her glasses. I'd suggest you not need it a third time. Derek didn't look back at me when they let him out to process the paperwork. I don't think he could. Vanessa, sitting 2 rows up with her parents, didn't look back either. She took a plea of her own that same week on a lesser charge tied to facilitating the fraudulent notarization, probation, community service, a fine. Her cousin Melody, who'd actually arranged the fake seal, got the harshest sentence of the 3, 18 months. Because unlike Derek and Vanessa, she had no relationship with me to weigh in the balance, and no mother in the room asking for restraint on her behalf. Raymond Prout's case took longer, 9 more months, 3 continuances, and eventually a decision by his attorneys. Faced with Walt Osai's binders, Colin Marsh's testimony, and 7 separate victims willing to take the stand, that a trial was a losing bet. He pled guilty to racketeering, fraud, and predatory lending violations across 4 counties on a gray Tuesday in October. And his sentencing hearing, 5 weeks later, was the last room I ever needed to sit in for any of this. The court allowed victim impact statements. I gave mine, short, factual, the kind of statement Priya had helped me shape to hold weight without spectacle. But the one I'd waited for was Otis Green's. He stood at the podium in a collared shirt his daughter had ironed for him that morning, and he didn't read from notes. "I'm 72 years old," he said. "Spent 40 years on a shrimp boat, raised 2 kids, buried a wife, and never once in all that time did I think somebody could take a house out from under me with a piece of paper and a stamp that wasn't even real. I didn't fight it when it happened to me because I believed the story that got told about it, that I was foolish, that I should have read closer, that it was on me. I sat in a room like this one 18 months ago in my head alone and told myself that story every single day." He paused, and I watched him find Prute's eyes across the room and hold them. I wanted on the record that it wasn't my fault. It was his. He built a machine to take houses from people who trusted the wrong relative, and he was careful never to get his own hands dirty doing it, and I hope this court understands that a man who's that careful isn't confused about right and wrong. He's just good at hiding from the consequences of already knowing. Raymond Prute sat through all of it with the same unbothered composure I'd seen at the preliminary hearing, and for a moment, I thought nothing had reached him at all. But when Judge Ellsworth handed down the sentence, 11 years, with restitution obligations that would follow him for the rest of his working life, most of his remaining assets seized to fund repayment to his victims, I saw something finally move behind his eyes. Not remorse, I don't think. Just the first real understanding, arriving far too late to do him any good. That the machine he'd built out of other people's desperation had, in the end, required him to underestimate exactly one family too many. Otis Green squeezed my hand so hard in that courtroom, I felt it for a week. "He deserved every second of that," Otis said, once we were out on the courthouse steps in the cold November light. "Every single second." I didn't disagree. Derek and I didn't speak for the first 4 months after his plea. I needed that distance, and honestly, I think he did too, needed to sit with what he'd done without his mother in the room to soften any part of it for him. The first time we spoke again was at Elliot's 7th birthday party, in June, in Vanessa's parents' backyard. Both of us circling each other carefully across a yard full of balloons and other people's children, until he finally came and sat beside me on the porch steps while Elliot chased a beach ball across the grass. "I don't know how to start apologizing for something this big," he said. "I've tried writing it a dozen times. It always sounds like I'm making excuses even when I'm trying not to." "Then don't write it," I said. "Just tell me the truest thing you understand right now today about what you did." He was quiet for a long moment, watching his son. "I stopped seeing you as a person who could say no," he said finally. "Somewhere along the way, I don't even know exactly when, I started thinking of what you had as something that was eventually going to be mine anyway, so borrowing it early didn't feel like stealing. It felt like moving up a timeline. And that's Mom, that's insane, saying it out loud. You were a person the whole time. You are a person. I just stopped acting like I knew that. It wasn't a full accounting. I don't think it will ever be entirely full. Some wounds don't resolve into a tidy, complete understanding, not even years later. But it was the truest thing he'd said to me since Portugal, and I felt something in my chest ease, just slightly, for the first time in months. I'm not going to pretend this is healed, I told him. It's not, and it might not fully heal for a long time, maybe not ever completely. But I'm not going anywhere, Derek. I'm your mother. That doesn't stop being true because you did something unforgivable. It just means we're going to have to figure out what a relationship looks like on the other side of unforgivable, if we want one at all. That's going to take longer than either of us wants it to. He nodded and didn't push for more than that, which I took as its own small sign of growth. Beatrice Call's granddaughter got married that spring, exactly as promised, in a ceremony under the live oaks at a plantation-turned-events venue 20 minutes outside town, and Whitfield & Co. did every last detail of it, the arch, the tablescapes, the whole soft, golden production of it. Beatrice found me in the reception tent afterward, champagne in hand, and told me, loud enough for two of the women from her book club to hear, that it was the finest wedding she'd ever attended in 71 years of attending weddings, present company included. Word travels the same way gossip does, it turns out, once you give it a good enough reason to move. By the following year, Whitfield & Co. had booked more events than any year in the company's history, and I'd like to think that isn't a coincidence, that there's something people respond to in a woman who was tested publicly and didn't fold, even if none of them would ever say it to my face in quite those words. I hosted a dinner that fall, in my own dining room, at my own table, with my own name on the deed hanging quietly and permanently over the whole evening, even though nobody mentioned it out loud. Priya came. Tyler came, with his girlfriend, who turned out to be exactly as unimpressed by nonsense as he needed someone to be. Brian Castle came, because somewhere in the last year she'd stopped being a witness in my case and started being a friend. The two of us bonded in that particular way people get bonded by having survived the same bad weather. And Otis Green came, driven the whole way down from Jasper County by his daughter, sitting at my table in a house that was, in its own way, a kind of answer to the one he'd lost proof that it was possible to get one back. "Nice place," he said, looking around my dining room, the same crown molding I'd had restored 15 years ago, the same windows that caught the last of the evening light over the marsh. "It's mine," I told him, and I watched him understand exactly what I meant by it, because he was the one person at that table who understood the full weight of that particular sentence better than anyone. "Damn right it is," he said, and raised his glass, and the whole table raised theirs with him. And for the first time in over a year, I sat in my own home surrounded by people who had chosen, at real cost to themselves, to tell me the truth instead of managing me, and I let myself simply enjoy being exactly where I was. Tyler and I are closer now than we've been in years, the kind of closeness that gets forged, unfortunately, in exactly this kind of fire. He comes for Sunday dinner most weeks now, brings his girlfriend sometimes, sits at the same table where all of this started, and we don't talk about it much anymore. But it's there, underneath everything, the fact that when it mattered most, he chose truth over comfortable silence, and I will never forget what that cost him with his brother. The house is mine. Fully, legally, unambiguously mine, the deed clean, the title insurance company having sorted out the mess of the fraudulent listing months ago. I still have the crepe myrtle in the front yard, the one Tyler broke his arm falling out of at 9 years old. I still have Derek's prom photos hanging in the upstairs hallway, though I'll admit I took them down for a while, and only put them back up when I was ready to look at his 18-year-old face, without immediately seeing the man he became at 36. I went back to Portugal 14 months after that first trip. Priya came with me this time, and we rented the same apartment above the fish market in Lagos. And on the fourth evening, the same time of day that man in the linen shirt had once knocked on my door with a folder that appended my entire life. I sat on that same balcony with a glass of Vinho Verde and watched the same orange fishing boats come into the same harbor. And I felt, for the first time since that first trip, something I hadn't expected to feel again so completely. Peace. Not the absence of everything that happened. I don't think that kind of peace exists. Not really, not for something this size. But the peace of knowing exactly who I am, exactly what I built, and exactly what I am and am not willing to let anyone take from me, even the people I love most in this world. My sons tried to sell my home while I was on the first vacation I'd taken in 20 years. They didn't get the house. But I think, in the end, I got something they never intended to give me at all. The absolute, unshakable certainty of what I'm made of, and the rest of my life to live inside a home that is, and will always be, entirely, undeniably mine.